Well, good morning. Thank you for that introduction. And I understand the responsibility of being the last speaker right before lunch, so I'll be respectful of time the best I can. Before I get started, I do want to give credit where credit's due. The data that I'm going to share today and the topic that we're going to discuss is largely the efforts of Martin Overholt, who's one of the grad students at the Meat Lab. And hopefully in a week or two here he'll have an opportunity to share this data with his committee and successfully defend these data. As we talk about pelletizing diets, pelletizing a diet really has some production benefits, some animal husbandry benefits, and some feed delivery benefits, in that it improves flowability, reduces bridging in bulk of feed bins, and it reduces segregation and dustiness of feedstuffs. We know that. But in addition to that, the reason that we're pelletizing these swine diets is so we can reduce particle size and increase growth rate and increase efficiency. The folks at Kansas State over the last couple years have really done a nice job of characterizing some of the benefits of pelletizing swine diets in terms of growth rate and feed efficiency. However, there are some drawbacks. And one of the things that I really appreciate about this invitation to speak today is that I think it's important as meat scientists and as nutritionists that we keep this dialogue open, that we understand as meat scientists that you as nutritionists are raising pigs, and that you as nutritionists realize that we as meat scientists are making pork. And so sometimes the things that we do on the farm, and oftentimes the practices that we do on the farm, have a very strong advantage in our meat industry, sometimes not so much. And so in this case, when we decrease particle size and we pelletize those swine diets, sometimes we can get an increase in stomach lesions and in ulcerations. Additionally, what's less known perhaps is that by pelletizing a diet and feeding a pelleted diet to our finishing pigs, we're actually increasing the iodine value of the fat in the belly associated with those pigs. Those of you not familiar, iodine value is probably the gold standard in evaluation of fat quality. So as we increase our iodine value, we've increased the unsaturation level of those pigs, and presumably we've decreased the quality of that fat, perhaps making it more difficult to slice the bellies that we use to make bacon, and we reduce our slicing yields. This can be from an increase of about 10% of linoleic acid and about 8% of linolenic acid. Again, some of the reports coming out of Kansas State University. And so that led us to two objectives in this particular experiment. The first objective was to determine the effects of pelleting on drop value. Again, those not familiar, drop value is the value of the non-carcass components associated with the pig. We deliver a whole pig to the slaughter facility, and we do that largely to capture the meat and the meat products, but there's some byproducts that are associated that also have value, and we were trying to understand this potential increase in ulceration, does it negatively impact the drop value of those pigs? Secondly, we wanted to determine if this increase expected in iodine value that had been previously reported will negatively affect our commercial slicing yields, the amount of bacon that we can put into a package because of some of these on-farm practices that we've used. Just to provide a little bit of objective or a little justification for our first objective, drop value currently listed on the Ag Marketing Services Carlot report is at $3.42 per hundredweight. That assumes an ending live weight of a 280-pound pig and a carcass yield of about 74%. So we're talking about a 205-pound carcass here. Total drop value is about $10 and $11. That is based on an assumption with one of our industry partners. I think if you look at the Carlot report, some of those values are closer to 7. And certainly some packers do a different job or market products a little differently, such that they're able to capture drop value a little bit differently as well. So the $10 and $11 are based on assumptions from some of our industry partners that we're using. Stomach weighs just shy of a pound and a half, and the stomach value is about $1.75 total value. So in their operation, it represents somewhere between 15 and 20% of their total drop value. And so again, drop value is where our margins are made. Drop value is where bills are paid. So to us, we feel it's very important. Our second objective justification then is, what does a 1% unit reduction in bacon slicing yield cost a processor? And so if we made, again, some assumptions, if we look at our national Carlot report, belly prices are pretty expensive, $1.57 a pound right now. I just looked before I came up here, I think they've crept up to actually $1.60. Right now, the most valuable primal on a carcass, probably the most valuable piece on the pig. Sometimes ears and bones and some of those things can slip up there and become the most valuable, but today I think bellies are certainly very valuable. If you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the national average price of retail bacon is $5.09 a pound. As we visit with our bacon processor friends, they tell us that if they can't make a number one slice, a slice that they can put into a package and sell at retail level, then the value of that bacon slice becomes reduced by 50%. And so based on those assumptions, that's $5.09 a pound. So just to make some assumptions here, if we assume a green weight value of 15 pounds, again, we're talking about a 205-pound carcass, 102-pound side. It's about 15% of the side weight. It's a pretty good estimate. Certainly there are bellies that are much heavier, and we can get into bellies that are much lighter. But for this exercise, we've decided to estimate our belly weights at 15 pounds. We buy a 15-pound belly at $1.57 a pound, so we've paid $23.64 for that belly. In the United States, our Code of Federal Regulations require that we cook our bellies back to green weight. So if we pump them to 10 to 12% over green weight, the weight of that belly as it comes off of the pig, we're required to cook it back to at least green weight. Excuse me. Canada, that's not the case, and so I was there last week. They make some high-quality bacon at 105, 110% of green weight. They make some maybe lesser quality bacon, even greater. But in the United States, we're required to come back to a processing yield of less than 100%. So that gives us a cooked weight of 14.85 pounds. If we assume an 83% slicing yield on number one slices, that will give us 12 pounds, 12.33 pounds of number one slice bacon. If we would assume that to a 1% reduction, so an 82% slice yield of our number one, that gives us 12.18 pounds of number one sliced bacon. If we assume the balance of that goes to number two slices, then we've got 17% and 18% respectively. I certainly understand that there's going to be some ends and pieces that won't qualify for number twos. So again, there is some assumptions here, but nonetheless, we would go from a 2.52 pounds of number two sliced bacon in our 83% slice yields and 2.67%, so a greater percent of our number twos, which gives us a revenue of $69.19 for the 83% slice yield and $68.81. If we subtract what we had to pay for that belly, it leaves us with a return on our investment $45.55 and $45.17. So that number one, or a 1% reduction in slicing yield costs 38 cents a belly. So again, fairly substantial amount if we think about that on an economic perspective. And so those were the justifications that led us to our hypothesis, or that led us to this experiment. In this experiment, we had 192 pigs put in a 2x2 factorial arrangement of treatments in a randomized complete block design. Those pigs were housed in pens of 4 pigs per pen, 2 barrows, 2 gilts in every pen. We had fed either a meal diet or a pelleted diet, and we fed them with either 0% or 30% distiller's grains. Pen was the experimental unit for all response variables. We had a total of 48 observations for 12, 12, 12, and 12 for each of our interaction means. The pigs were put on study as they came out of the nursery at about 10 weeks of age at a body weight average of about 26 kilos. They were fed a 3-phase dietary feeding program that lasted 5, 5, and 3 weeks in duration. At the end of the first phase, those pigs weighed 57.4 kilos, 92 kilos at the end of the second phase, and we killed them at about 113 kilos. Admittingly, they were plenty light. We would have liked to have seen them a little bit heavier, but other research obligations, we had to get those pigs out of the barn, and so ultimately we terminated that trial a little bit earlier than what we'd hoped. Dietary formulations being a nutrition conference, I decided to include those. For me, as a meat scientist, this would be the least exciting part of the trial, but I understand that that's not necessarily the case for most of the audience. I did want to provide some physical diet characteristics of the phase 3 diets. I've already had some discussions at break about our particle size, and you can see particle size of the meal diets and the particle size of those diets before we pelleted them. Certainly larger than we had hoped, but again, in a university setting, we asked them to manufacture the diets the way they normally would. This is what they gave us. Our response variables, we looked at growth performance. These animals were harvested on a Tuesday and a Thursday. So again, 4 pigs per pen, 2 barrows, 2 gilts. On Tuesday, we selected the heaviest barrow and the heaviest gilt in the pen. We slaughtered those 2 pigs. We did our complete visceral mass workup. So those pigs or those response variables are only going to have the 2 barrows, or the barrow and the gilt of each of the 2 blocks. All of the other pigs were then killed on that following Thursday. And so we evaluated fresh loin quality. As meat scientists, we're creatures of habit. We do that just for the sake of understanding our meat quality. We evaluated fresh belly characteristics, processed belly characteristics, and our commercial bacon slicing yields as part of our second objective. So let's talk about growth performance, carcass characteristics, and our loin quality. As we look, we saw no interactions of diet form and DDGS for our overall daily gain. So we've seen our main effects of diet form here in the blue bars, and our main effects of the DDGS inclusion in our orange and yellow bars. And we do see an increase in average daily gain of about 3.2% of our pelleted fed pigs over our meal fed pigs. We did have some interactions for intake and for growth efficiency, so these are interaction means here, but nonetheless you can see that our efficiency was increased by 5.6% of our pelleted fed pigs compared with our meal fed pigs. And so we felt very comfortable moving forward evaluating our additional 2 objectives based on the way that these pigs responded from a live phase growth performance response variable because they very closely mimic some of the other data that's out there. From a carcass characteristic standpoint, ending live weight was increased by 2.3%, represented 2.6 kilos. Carcass weights was increased by nearly 3%, and we didn't have an effect on our muscling or loin-eye area. We did have an increase of the pellet-fed pigs due to our carcass yields, and if we look at that, it's largely due to an increase in fat of those pellet-fed pigs relative to our meal-fed pigs. And so they went from 1.63 centimeters to 1.8 centimeters. That's not very much, but it does represent nearly a 10% increase in fat thickness at the 10th rib, and that ultimately reduced our estimated carcass yield by almost 2 percentage units. And so that carcass yield increase of our pellet-fed pigs is partially probably due to the increase in fatness, but then we'll also look at some gut fill and visceral mass information here in just a second. As I said, we did evaluate fresh loin quality, so tenderness, color, water holding capacity, all of those type of characteristics that you would anticipate in a fresh meat quality observation. As expected, we didn't observe any differences in meat quality that for color, marbling, and firmness, our subjective evaluations, nothing in extractable lipid, objective color, ultimate pH, water holding capacity. Pelleting those diets did not affect meat quality on any parameters. As I said, the heaviest barrow and the heaviest gilt that was killed on Tuesday, we did do a full GI tract workup on those animals. And for our full GI tract, what we did, harvested those animals, put them in a bag, put them in a pan, weighed that entire GI tract, then began to take those pieces apart, clean them with water, and then weigh them again so that we could understand total GI tract weights, component weights, and the amount of the gut fill. And so as we look at full GI tract weights, we see no differences of our pellet-fed pigs compared with our meal-fed pigs, but as a percentage of ending live weight, we do see this reduction in our GI tract weight. Again, that's the weight of the tissue and the weight of its contents. When we empty those contents and we reweigh them, and so when I talk about intestinal mass, I'm talking about the sum of the esophagus, the stomach, the small and the large intestines. And so when we weighed them, we see no differences either in absolute weight or as a percentage of ending live weight. And so what that means is we actually had a reduction in our percentage of ending live or of gut fill based on ending live weight of those animals. And so to look at our first objective, again with ulcer scores, what we would expect as we decrease particle size and increase pelleting, we'll see an increase in ulcer scores. So with the ulcers, what we did, we collected those stomachs, we froze them, thawed them, and then using a panel of 3 folks evaluated ulcerations on a 0 to 10 scale. And so what we observed is just as you would expect, that we did get an increase of our ulcer scores of nearly half a unit there of our meal pigs compared with our pellet-fed pigs. Even so, all of these pigs would consider to have a stomach that was very healthy. So, fresh belly characteristics, fat quality, and bacon slicing yields. If we look at our natural fall belly, and what we define as a natural fall belly is an IMPS number 409. Those not familiar, that means that as that belly falls off the pig, so at main break, when you take the spare ribs out and what you have left, we weighed that belly. And as you would expect, pigs were heavier, bellies were heavier. But as a percentage of that chilled side weight, no differences. We did not affect allometric growth by including pellets in our diets. Also, no differences in our dimensional characteristics of those diets. At Illinois, our fat sample for fatty acid profile is taken on the dorsal edge at the anterior end of the pig, and we try to collect all 3 fat layers and composite those for our fatty acid profile sample. If we look at our iodine values and our individual fatty acids, we did see that increased observed iodine value that we'd anticipated by about 3.1 units. So right in there where we expected, and that was due to this 2.73 percentage unit increase of linoleic acid. Just to put that in context of the main effects of the pigs that were fed 30% distiller's grains, we did observe an increase of 7 iodine value units. And so when we turn those bellies into bacon, what we observed is basically what you would expect. Green weights were heavier, so at this point any trim specks, a thaw loss, still heavier when we pumped them. We put the same amount of pump in both types of bellies. Process weights, all those types of things were relatively similar. So pelleting did not affect our belly processing characteristics. So now for objective 2. If we look at our slicing yields of those pigs, again our meal and pellet fed pigs are in the blue bars, and our distiller's grain inclusions are in the orange bars. And so we observed no differences in slice yields with a p-value of 0.7 between our meal-fed pigs and our pellet-fed pigs. Pelleting did not affect slicing yield. What's interesting though is these bellies were sliced on an Anko slicer. So basically what that means is bellies were sliced in a push feed mechanism where one belly is sliced based on the pressure of the next belly pushing it through. When we do that, we slice these bellies for a target of 10 to 12 slices per pound of sliced bacon. However, we did see this decrease in the amount of slices per kilogram of bacon. So even though we targeted an equal slice thickness and a slice weight per kilogram, we actually got a reduction of about 1.2 slices per kilogram of cooked bacon per belly. My colleague and I are relatively sensitive to the skepticism of slice yields. It's very variable. There's a lot of things going on. Some of that variation can be attributed to the equipment and the process, and so you've got to be aware of that and take that into consideration. And so we offer this bit of support. If we look at 2 different studies here, the Tavares study looked at comparing the effects of distiller's grains and not including distiller's grains on the effects of iodine value. He reported an 8.48 iodine value unit increase of 30% distillers, but only reported a 1.1 percentage unit reduction in slice yields. On the other hand, Kyle et al. And some work before that looked at the effects of barrows and bores on slice yields. In that study, reported a difference of only 1.13 iodine value units, but actually reported a decrease of our bores relative to our barrows of nearly 4 percentage units. So, what does that mean? It means that iodine value is relatively weakly correlated with slice yields. And so if we look at our slicing yield and our correlation coefficients, we see that moisture in these population of pigs was the most strongly correlated in thickness, fat, unsaturated fats, flop distance, green weight, and iodine value, though statistically correlated, was relatively weak in its relationship with slice yields. And so if we look at our bacon slice characteristics after we brought those bellies back to the University of Illinois, characterize those bacons, we look at our lean to fat. Basically what we do is take pictures, take slices out of those bellies, take pictures of them to characterize lean to fat ratio, primary lean, secondary lean, total fat, those types of parameters. And again, we saw an interaction with our proximate data between moisture and extractable lipid, but if we look at our lean to fat, we do see that our meal-fed pigs did have a greater lean to fat ratio compared with our pelleted fed pigs, which makes sense. Those pelleted fed pigs were fatter at the 10th rib, they were fatter in their bellies, and they're fatter in their bacon slices. So just to summarize, pelleting diets did increase growth rate and feed efficiency just as we anticipated, and in response is very similar to other data. Pelleting diets did increase our carcass weights, increased yield, and actually made those pigs slightly fatter at the 10th rib, which resulted in a decrease in our estimated lean. We observed no negative effects of pelleting on drop value. Remember, all of those pigs were less than a 2. I think of the pigs that we characterized, the 96 of them, the highest observed ulcer score that we had in the whole population was a 4. So all of these pigs were relatively healthy. We did see an increase in our iodine values, but it didn't affect the overall dimensions of that belly. We didn't observe a reduction in our slicing yields. However, slice per kilogram was reduced in our pellet-fed pigs. Where that becomes important is if we're selling retail bacon on a weight basis, we had no effect. But if we're selling food service bacon where they sell that bacon on a piece basis, remember, we had a 1.2 slice reduction. And so in that case, this can become somewhat important. So those conclusions: determine the effects of pelleting on drop value to stomach ulcerations. We report none. Determine if the increase in expected iodine value results in a decreased commercial bacon slice yields. No on a weight basis, yes on a piece count basis. So just to wrap up, pelleting diets improve growth performance. Feeding pelleting diet reduces drop weight due to reduced gut fill. Pellet-fed pigs yielded a heavier, fatter carcass. Pelleting did increase iodine values, but despite that increase in iodine values, slicing yields were unaffected. So our take-home message for the trial: producers can feed pelleted diets to improve growth performance without negatively affecting drop value or commercial slice yields. So that concludes my talk. I'd be happy to take any questions.